perhaps the most interesting primary of them all right now, which is in Texas.
The question of what type of fight do you want?
I mean, just imagine
I
those.
would say at least. If I were you, July 4th fireworks,
Yeah.
I mean, it is going to be wow.
Hey guys, great to see you. I'm so excited to have two special guests we love having on this pod. Courtney Subramanian, White House reporter at Bloomberg. And again this week, very happy to have back Finn Gomez, political director at CBS News and White House executive director. It's great to see you guys.
Great to see you. Thanks for having us, Sumi.
I love being on my favorite podcast.
We love to hear that, Finn.
Love coming back.
We love to hear that, and there's so much to talk about. Of course, we are kind of still getting over the hangover of the State of the Union address and what it told us about where things go from here. Really did kind of set the path, didn't it, for where President Trump is going to head in the coming weeks and months.
Absolutely. I saw it as like a blueprint for what, the Republicans and the president are going to focus on as the midterm cycle really revs up. We have the first primaries of the midterms coming up in a few days. So I think, you saw he's laying out the roadmap. This is what we're going to focus on. This is what we're going to do. And it was, affordability, and it was immigration, sort of doubling down on that. And you saw like in his speech, that hour and 48-minute speech or whatever, what they intend to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was more about firing up his base more so than it was about reaching out to the fraying coalition that elected him in 2024. We heard from him doubling down, as Finn said, on his hardline immigration stance, on his tariff policy, which the Supreme Court just struck down a bulk of that. But, he projected confidence on this, right? And he didn't really address the concerns about bringing down costs. He proclaimed this was a golden age, of the American economy, where we know that polling has shown voters really want to hear about what the administration is doing. But the White House seemingly is largely leaving that to Republicans to sharpen that messaging, and they're letting Trump just be Trump and paint the rosy, optimistic picture that he often does.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say, I was speaking to some Republican strategists who are looking ahead to this massive midterms year, who said there were some concerns on Capitol Hill that President Trump didn't necessarily address some of those affordability issues in the way that they would have liked. But, Finn, you mentioned primaries, and I thought we could take this episode to talk about perhaps the most interesting primary of them all right now, which is in Texas, especially with President Trump in Texas this weekend. And it just really is a primary on both sides of the aisle for Senate seats that these races are really indicative of where these two parties are right now and where President Trump's power lies. So you have the incumbent Senator John Cornyn. He is a four-term senator, really a fixture in Texas politics, a fixture in Washington, of course, as well, serving 4 terms. He's more of a traditional Republican, but since President Trump has been in office, he has moved a bit to the right, especially in this campaign. And that is in part because he's being challenged by Ken Paxton, the attorney general, who is a hard right MAGA candidate, populist, and he really has brought the fight to Senator Cornyn. And there is a third candidate as well, Wesley Hunt, a military veteran, a 2-term congressman, and a staunch supporter of President Trump. But it's interesting. I'm curious to hear what both of you have to say about what this race on the Republican side tells us about where MAGA is right now and President Trump's power.
I think it's significant, especially in Texas. This is ruby red Texas. This is a state where no Democrat has won statewide since 1994. But this is, you really have, like you said, Sumi, it shows the dynamics within the Republican Party, sort of that intra-party fight that you're seeing between sort of like who is most MAGA. It's notable that the president has not weighed into this race, right? That is big, because if he did, it would probably clear the field. I was told by a Republican close to the political arm of the Senate Republicans that it was a win for Cornyn that Trump did not weigh in this race. However, as you know, Sumi, In Texas, they have to hit the 50% threshold.
Yeah.
And right now, because these three are sort of, battling it out, it's a lot of experts do not believe they're going to hit that 50% threshold, which means we expect a May 26th runoff with the top two contenders. A lot of people, obviously think it's going to be Cornyn and Paxton, but it could be a variation of those three. Wesley Hunt does feel that he can upset. But once we get to that runoff, I was told to expect a potential endorsement from the president to weigh in that race. And that could really, again, that could really make a significant difference.
The question is whether this spells real trouble for Republicans in November, because they're spending so much time and money on this primary race, right? This is ruby red Texas. And as Finn said, if this goes to a runoff, then the national arm of Republicans are going to be spending even more money that could be going to other competitive races in Ohio, in Georgia, in Michigan, right? So this is something that is taking a lot of time and energy away from the party on what should be a reliably, red, easy election. And I think one of the big issues is who emerges from this runoff if it is Paxton and Cornyn, right? So the national Republicans who are behind Cornyn say that he has a better chance of beating one of the two Democratic candidates, James Tallarico or Jasmine Crockett. Whereas if it's Paxton, who is this more MAGA brand populist, right, who speaks to the president's core supporters more, he might have a tougher time against one of these candidates in November in a general.
Yeah, everything is bigger in Texas, isn't it? And it feels like the disagreements within the MAGA base and some of those pushes and pulls within the Republican Party right now are playing out on a main stage right now in Texas. And we have to say Ken Paxton is not without some serious baggage. He was acquitted in an impeachment trial in the state of Texas back in 2023. He's going through a messy divorce, and all of that is being played up in these pretty vitriolic ads that are being played out on television across Texas right now. And it's so interesting to see Ken Paxton, who is really as MAGA as you can get, talk so much about how he advocates for President Trump's agenda. He criticizes Senator Cornyn for being the Washington establishment. He's talked about the fact that Washington, to your point, Courtney, about the money spent in this, that Washington is spending so much money on these ads, and he's saying, look, I am the grassroots campaigner here, basically, even though he's the attorney general, that this is about the elites versus the little guy. That's how he's painting it. And the fact that President Trump hasn't weighed in yet, that has frustrated some Republicans, but at the same time, it's a difficult race for him to weigh in on, because it really does go to the question of who best represents MAGA, who best represents President Trump's interests at a time when you do have voters frustrated. If we go back to that State of the Union discussion we were just having, you do have some voters who are frustrated with President Trump on the economy, on immigration, and you have two candidates who both say, in Cornyn and Paxton, who both say they are very close to the president, but also want to walk that fine line of speaking to some of those voters' concerns.
No, it is the most, and to your point and to Courtney's point, it is the most expensive Senate primary race in history. The amount of money, it's like over $100 million. It's so much money. And for Republicans, like, they felt that this was a pretty safe district. And for many here in Washington, Republicans here, including Senator Tim Scott in the NRSC, who have endorsed, who have supported Cornyn, they would rather spend that money in other states where they have to sort of defend territory, not here. And the fact that we're even talking right now, there's been a lot of conversation, Sumi, that the Senate is in play. Before, a few months ago, it wasn't like that. It was, okay, the House is definitely in play. A lot of people saying that the Democrats have a good chance of recapturing it because of the historic headwinds, the slipping poll numbers that the president and his party are facing. But the Senate wasn't in question. But now it is. A lot of people, both Republicans and Democrats, have told me that they feel that it could be in play. And it has to align just perfectly for Democrats. They have to win in some states where they maybe up a little bit of an uphill battle, but it could happen, and that's very interesting right now.
Well, and let's talk about the Democrat side in Texas, because
Yeah.
Courtney, you just mentioned this, and the two candidates there. This has been a fascinating race to watch as well. So the Democrats will be voting in their primary as well for their Senate candidate, and it's between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and State Representative James Tallarico. And I think, some of our viewers and listeners probably have been hearing the name James Tallarico quite a bit, because he has been across the late night shows. He's been across, the New York Times and all the quote unquote mainstream media. He is someone who really is seen as a new style of Democrat in a state like Texas. Just tell me what you guys think about the Democrat side of this race, because it has been really interesting to watch the coverage in particular.
I've been really following this closely, as I know you guys have too, but I think it's interesting because it's truly a test case for the Democrats in terms of what the right pathway is forward for the party, right? You have Jasmine Crockett, who is this progressive, outspoken, who has really taken on the president. She spars with Republicans on Twitter. She's really framed herself as somebody who's going to take on Donald Trump, right? And then you have James Tallarico, who is this more centrist, faith-based politician, and he's really building momentum. But it really strikes at the heart of the question of what is the right vision for the Democrats moving forward? Is it more moderate? Is it more progressive? Right? And it's not because of where they have to win, because they're in Texas, of course, but it does get to the question of if the party is going to flip back, some of those disaffected voters who voted for Donald Trump in 2024, if they're going to be able to do that in 2028, they need to win in these places where we have these disillusioned voters. And so this is a test run, right, for what we're going to see on the national stage moving forward for the Democrats.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I do think, again, just to reiterate the point, that no Democrat has won statewide in 32 years. But for the first time, and we've heard variations of this before, Sue. I mean, we've heard, Beto O'Rourke and then Colin Allred, this is the year when Democrats believe that they're going to turn Texas blue. But I will say, with Tallarico, if he does win, and look, that's a very tough primary battle. We've seen some polls that show, she's on top. But if he does win, I've heard a lot of Democrats, both progressives, both centrists, who feel that if he wins, they do have their best shot of possibly picking off this seat. Especially according to them, according to Democrats I've spoken to, especially if it's Ken Paxton, because Paxton does have the political baggage that you talked about, Sumi. He is very MAGA, very, very MAGA. I mean, again, that plays well in a lot of parts of Texas, but because Tallarico can appeal to the center, he can appeal to potentially faith voters. And he has a way, this sort of positive tenor that he's really central to his campaign, that especially in a very polarized climate that we are now experiencing, that they feel that he could really have a real shot. If it is Jasmine Crockett, if she does pull off a win here in the primary, and again, they both have to hit that 50% threshold. If you don't, it's going to be a runoff in May. But if she does, I think that you could potentially see a Paxton Crockett matchup, and I think that
which would be fiery. Imagine that. I mean, just imagine those.
To say the least, the fiery like July 4th fireworks. Yeah. I mean, it is going to be. Wow. I mean, very, two very outspoken candidates. But we'll see how that plays out. It is a jump ball. No one really knows. They're like, it's really pretty amazing race.
One of the most important things to mention about James Tallarico is he is a Presbyterian seminarian. He is someone who is deeply rooted in faith. And that is one of the reasons that Democrats look to this young white man in Texas and say, this could possibly be a way not only to win back a ruby red state like Texas, at least a Senate seat, but also to model how Democrats talk about faith and religion to some more moderate and more conservative voters in particular in the future. And honestly, they haven't necessarily had a candidate who can appeal to faith-based voters in the past, like James Tallarico. And if you listen to, some of the many interviews he's given, the many appearances he's had, he speaks like a preacher. He is able to reach out in that sense also to some of the more conservative Black voters, those who have grown up in the church as well. And so there's real hopes being placed on James Tallarico being someone who can appeal to a new class of voters for Democrats. That being said, Jasmine Crockett, to both of your points, has made a name for herself. There have been viral clips of her pushing back at President Trump, almost in a way that you've seen Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, do so on social media. But for her, it's these viral clips and hearings where she really takes on President Trump. She has built a strong base of support, and she's done a ton of outreach. There has been controversy in this race between these two candidates about race itself, and accusations that James Tallarico had made a comment about a former Congressman Colin Allred. All that to say, it's something that he's denied. And you really do get the sense that despite the fact that these are two pretty good candidates for the Democrats, it does give us a pretty good sense of where the Democrats are heading by who wins this type of race. And to your point, Finn, if the Democrats can pick up a Senate seat in Texas, that really changes the map for them.
Yeah, Senator Schumer has said Minority Leader Schumer has said that he basically needs 4, right, to take back the Senate. And if this is in play, it changes the whole dynamic and the whole roadmap to them regaining power. I will also just say, Sumi, I do think that this primary race on the Democratic side could come down to the Hispanic vote, Latinos in Texas. If you recall, again, in 2024, nearly half of them voted for President Trump. 54% of Hispanic men voted for President Trump, according to Pew. Now, we have seen, even in our own CBS News polling, a double-digit slide of support for the president with Hispanic voters. This is what, 30%, approximately 30% or more of the population in Texas is made up of Hispanic voters. And if there is that swing, and we've seen that Democratic overperformance, not only in 2025, double digit on average overperformance, but also in some of these special elections that we've seen in Texas at a much smaller scale, including one in Tarrant County where the Senate, it was a state Senate race where you saw where it had been in Republican hands for 40 years, and you saw a Democrat win by double digits. Democrats look at that and like, okay, this is a chance, but if you really pulling it off. But if you look even deeper within that race, it was the significant Latino support that had gone to Trump that had switched to the Democratic candidate in that race.
One other sort of theme I just wanted to jump in here, that I think this really hits on for Democrats is the question of what type of fight do you want, right? We had heard from voters, from the electorate before 2024, they wanted to see Democrats fight. And Jasmine Crockett is somebody who has taken that fight directly to Donald Trump, right? Directly to the Republican Party. She said, I'm not afraid to take them on. James Tallarico is somebody who is aiming the fight more at the political institutions themselves, right? This is somebody who's trying to go for that cross-party appeal. He had this quote that really stood out to me where he said, if you hate politics and you've never voted before, you have a place in this campaign. If you have voted for Democrats, but you're tired of DC Democrats always folding, you have a place in this campaign. And if you voted for Donald Trump, but you're fed up with extremism and corruption in our government, you have a place. And I think that type of fight is the other type of fight that we're seeing voters that, this is something that really appeals to them, right? And so that this race also sort of strikes at what kind of fight is it that the Democrats are going to really sharpen their message on ahead of November?
That's such a good point, Courtney. I think that's a really important point to make on the Democrat side. And I know we've talked almost exclusively about Texas in this pod, but I figured that maybe is a good jumping off point to just kind of run through a few of the other primary races that are not happening on March 3rd like Texas, but are interesting. And I was looking at Maine, which I find fascinating because you have that, more moderate Republican Senator Susan Collins, who is running again. She will be facing off against one of two candidates on the Democrat side. And that Democrat race is again underlining that kind of battle for the soul of the Democratic Party. You have Janet Mills, who's kind of the governor, who's kind of this establishment Democratic figure. And then you have Graham Plattner, this military vet who is extremely progressive. He has really fashioned himself as the anti-establishment candidate. He's gotten the backing of Bernie Sanders, Senator Bernie Sanders. He's been very controversial. He had a tattoo, and yeah, I mean, what do you think of him, Finn? Do you think this is someone who really could win that primary in Maine?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I'm talking to people in Maine. I'm talking to Democrats in Maine who believe that he does have a shot. I mean, he sort of came out of nowhere, but he's this outsider progressive candidate during a climate where Democrats, like to your point, to me, want and to Courtney's point, want a fighter, and I think you have that. They're also, if you look at polling numbers. Our polling, yes, there's a swing away from the Republican Party, but they're not necessarily going to the Democratic Party either. There's this anger of both parties, so that and the establishment and leadership of both parties. So the fact that this was Schumer's pick, that Janet Mills was Schumer's pick, even though she has a big name ID, popular governor. I mean, I wouldn't count her out either. Yeah. She is a formidable candidate and has raised a lot of money. But Plattner is someone who came out of nowhere who can, and if you look at some recent polls, who can win. And I think we've seen it in other places in 2025. Mamdani, for one, Zohran Mamdani in New York, who was polling at 1%, and as we all know, went on to win in that big upset victory in New York City's mayoral race. So a lot of progressives, especially, feel that this could be that Plattner could follow the same track to upsetting the establishment pick in this race.
It kind of feels like it's like this question of authenticity, right?
Yeah.
It's a matter of is the candidate authentic? And I think Plattner really speaks to that piece for a lot of people, because this is somebody who, obviously had to issue a series of apologies for these tweets about, dismissing sexual assault, homophobic slurs, and then of course, the tattoo on his chest that was associated with Nazism. But he was very earnest, or appeared very earnest in the way that he accepted fault and tried to explain, away some of these misguided episodes in the past, right? And I think a lot of people really connected to that. And so, the question, I think, for the Democratic Party and in this particular race is whether authenticity is going to sort of rule the roost when it comes to who's going to prevail. I'm
old enough, I'm dating myself here, but my first midterms that I've covered was 2010. And in 2010, what you saw on the Republican side, you saw the rise of the Tea Party movement, right? And in that cycle, what you did see was these very popular base supported candidates who came out of nowhere. Same thing. They beat the incumbent, or they beat the establishment pick, but they lost in the general election. Now, what could happen here with progressives on the Democratic side is that, this could happen too in Texas, in Maine. Like, will those progressive candidates upset the establishment pick or whatever? But can they pick off the incumbent? Can they pick off in the general election? It's a different electorate in the general election. We all know that.
Guys, it's been so much fun talking with you that I didn't even get to any of the other Senate primaries and Senate races that I wanted to talk about, Michigan and North Carolina, possibly Iowa being in play. But all of this, the points that you both have made, underlines the larger battles happening across the country as we head towards the midterms. But we'll have to talk about it another time. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Really good to have you back in the pod. If you enjoyed this episode of The President's Path, then like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'd love to hear from you. So please leave us a comment below or email us on path@bbc.co.uk.